Here you go.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. I just had to walk away and go upstairs, then let it be, just forget about it, don't say nothing. That's all she had to do. There's one thing I want to address in that presentation you just heard. Commonwealth, no one in this courtroom is saying that domestic violence doesn't exist. No one in this courtroom is saying nobody suffers from domestic violence. Nobody's saying that. The Commonwealth is asking you to consider all of the circumstances in this case. All of the circumstances in this case. And acknowledging that there are battered women, that there is domestic violence, this defendant is still guilty. You didn't hear from Luis. That's true. You did hear from a very important witness about what happened. You heard from Mrs. Medina in that interview that we all watched. And I ask you, and I'm sure the defense would agree, please watch that interview again. Listen to it closely. And if you go back and listen to that interview again, I ask you to consider closely not what she says, but how many times she says certain things and what appears to be top of mind for her. And obviously, she's concerned about Luis. She's concerned about his condition. She wants to know if he's going to be okay. But other than that, what is she thinking about? Over and over and over again. Why didn't I walk away? Go upstairs or go to bed? If she knew that she could have just let it be, then she should have. The defense claims that Mrs. Medina couldn't remember what happened that night, but because of her mental state. You heard from Dr. Zeisel, who'd never met her in person before yesterday, started evaluating her 4.5 years after this event. But she does remember what happened. She remembered that night when she talked to the police. She told you herself. She knew what she was doing that night. She remembers getting off work at 3:30. She remembers that her and Luis were outside hanging out on the patio. She remembers they were cooking out. If you listen to the interview, she specifically says that he was planning on cooking fat. She remembers that they were drinking. She told you herself she had over 5 beers. She remembers she was taking tequila shots. She remembers Luis was drinking, but she didn't think he was drunk. She told you that they were having an argument. She even remembers what the argument was about. Regular things about their kids. Specifically, the argument was about comparing their kids, which she didn't like. She remembers throwing a candle. She remembers she went inside to get a knife. She remembers Luis stayed outside when she went to get it. She remembers she came outside because she was trying to say, "You're not going to hit me." And she's right. He is not allowed to hit her. That is horrible. Horrible. But she still returned to the argument with the knife. She knows that it happened outside. Just listen to what she says. It happened outside because then he ran inside and I ran after him. Even if she was having issues or she was suffering from any mental disorders, it defies the evidence in the case to think that she doesn't remember what happened that night. You heard from Francis Nova, first officer on scene. She's yelling at him to save her husband, tells him that she stabbed her husband. She knew that she stabbed him. In that interview, the officers give her so many chances to say what happened. They're patient with her. They're asking her if there's anything else that that they should know. They ask her about her injuries. They take pictures of her injuries. They try as hard as they can under the circumstances to find out what happened. And I would disagree with Dr. Zeisel. I would say that interview did yield fruit. Although it was difficult, she was upset and she was distraught, she did provide them with important information about what happened. She remembers. She just didn't want to admit it. She didn't want to admit it to herself. Let's talk about Dr. Zeisel. Clearly a very smart, well-spoken, accomplished doctor. But think about the conditions under which he evaluated Mrs. Medina. And I know there were some difficulties due to her unwillingness to meet with him or show herself. But the fact of the matter is all those meetings were either phone calls, just their voices, or FaceTime. FaceTime with Mrs. Medina on her cell phone, Dr. Zeisel only able to see the top of her body. And Dr. Zeisel agreed, not ideal circumstances as a psychologist under which to conduct an evaluation. And I know he had some things to say about the police interview, something he himself admitted was Monday morning quarterbacking. But at least they met with her face-to-face when they conducted that interview and very patiently and kindly attempted to extract from her what happened so that they could find the truth. Dr. Zeisel had never seen her in person before yesterday. Now, do you think under those circumstances he was in a position to diagnose somebody's mental state 4.5 years after the event occurred? And he did sure have a lot to say about Luis Medina, a man he'd never met, never tried to speak to, based on information from 3 people who didn't know Mr. Medina well. You heard from the 3 witnesses, all friends with Lucy, worked with her for 15 years, the Social Security Administration, her cousin, who obviously has known her since she was born, and they saw her with bruises, they saw her wearing sweaters, she was taking work off. Nobody's disputing anything she said, but I would just suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't really know what was going on in their relationship, and by their own admission, when they attempted to speak to Lucy about it, she never wanted to talk about her personal life. She'd tell them to butt out if they tried to ask. No one's asking you to like Luis Medina. No one's saying that he did nothing wrong. Obviously, no matter what was going on, Lucy and Luis have had a complicated relationship. They've been together for a long time. You heard all the evidence. Again, no one's asking you to think that he was not at fault. No one's saying that he's a wonderful person. You don't have to like him. But he didn't get to deserve to get stabbed in the neck, suffer from the injuries you heard about, the blood you saw pictures of, blood on the patio, blood leading to the door to the apartment, blood on the threshold, blood on the front, on the door into the apartment, blood down the hallway, blood in the kitchen. And Jesus Melendez and Francis Nova told you about Mr. Medina when they arrived on scene. And again, think about what Mrs. Medina told you in the interview. These issues, and again, nobody's saying that obviously Mrs. Medina does not deserve to get hurt, did not deserve to get abused, nothing like that, of course not, that's horrible. But I ask you to consider the information that the officers had the night of this incident. As they were trying to extract this information from Lucy, the information that she gave them was that this happened for several years. Was she trying to protect him? Maybe, but that's the information that they had. And again, when you make the choice to leave an argument, even if it's turned physical, go to another location, grab a weapon, and come back to that argument that you had just left, you're using more force than was necessary. You're not taking reasonable steps to escape or to leave the situation. And she told you she did leave the situation. She went inside to the kitchen, and he was still outside. This was not self-defense. She didn't leave the argument. She used more force than was necessary. As I told you at the beginning of this trial, no one is saying that the defendant had no right to defend herself. But as you heard in the jury instructions just now, the law does not permit retaliation or revenge. The need to protect yourself ends when that necessity ends. And there's limits of what you can do to defend yourself. You heard about ways that the Commonwealth can disprove self-defense. Specifically, the defendant did not use or attempt to use all proper and reasonable means under the circumstances to avoid physical combat before resorting to the use of deadly force. And separately, that the defendant used more force than was reasonably necessary in the circumstances. I'd suggest that was the case, though both of those circumstances were the case here. You saw that yard. You heard about where they were. She told you herself she didn't use reasonable means to get out of the situation. Or she did, but then she went back. She went into the kitchen, she grabbed a knife, Mr. Medina stayed outside, she came back outside, he was still there. She returned to the argument with a weapon. She used deadly force after she admitted to you that she should have just walked away, and she should have just walked away, gone upstairs, gone to bed, left it alone. There was one knife. There was one weapon. There was the knife that Lucy left the argument in the yard and went in to grab, that she came back outside and stabbed Mr. Medina with. You saw pictures of that knife lying on the patio with blood on the blade. There's no question that she escalated that argument, even if there was a struggle, and even if it had turned physical. As you heard, she could not use more force than was necessary, and she had left the argument. Your verdict cannot be based on sympathy, cannot be based on things not in evidence, must be based on the evidence that you heard, the interview, the pictures, the information from the witnesses. The evidence shows you that, obviously, this was not a perfect relationship, far from it. But that doesn't give somebody the right to stab somebody in the neck, particularly when that person acknowledges in the hours immediately after the incident that they left the argument, grabbed a knife, went back outside, returned to the argument, didn't leave it alone, didn't go upstairs, didn't go to bed. She didn't just walk away. I ask you to find Lucy Medina guilty of the sole charge. Thank you all very much.